Evelyn Carter stood at the kitchen sink, her fingers working mechanically as she scrubbed the last dish from dinner. The soft hum of the radio played in the background, but she wasn't paying attention to the music or the announcer's voice. Instead, her thoughts wandered to her husband, Jason, who hadn't come home yet. Again, she glanced at the clock above the stove. It was nearly 9 p.m., much later than Jason usually returned. He'd called earlier, claiming that there was some urgent work at the shop, but that excuse was becoming all too frequent. For the past few months, Jason had spent more and more time at Carter's Auto Repair, the family business he had inherited after his father passed away a year ago. What had once been a modest but successful garage in their small Ohio town was now struggling, and Jason was trying desperately to keep it afloat. The Carters had been married for 12 years. Both born and raised in this rural part of Ohio, they had known each other since high school. Evelyn, now 34, was a quiet woman with a calm and nurturing nature. She had worked as a nurse at the local clinic for nearly a decade, and while she loved helping others, there were times when the long hours and the emotional toll weighed heavily on her. She and Jason had built a life together, bought a small house on the edge of town, and had once talked about starting a family. But life, as it often does, had taken them in a different direction. Jason, now 36, was a tall, broad-shouldered man, the kind of person everyone in town trusted to fix their car or lend a hand when needed. His father, a gruff but well-respected mechanic, had started the shop in the 1970s, and Jason had grown up learning the trade. He was good at what he did, meticulous with his hands and always willing to go the extra mile for his customers. But lately, the stress of running the business on his own had been taking its toll. The auto industry wasn't what it used to be, and competition from bigger, more modern garages in nearby towns had started to cut into their profits. Evelyn noticed the change in him. At first, she attributed his distance to grief over his father's passing. Jason had always been close to his dad, and when he died, it was as if part of Jason had died too. He became more withdrawn, spending long hours at the shop, working late into the night. Evelyn tried to be understanding, giving him space to process his emotions and cope with the burden of running the business. But the months dragged on, and the emotional distance between them grew wider. Their conversations became brief and surface level, mostly about bills, work, and the practicalities of running a household. Gone were the days when they'd curl up on the couch together after dinner, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. Now, Evelyn spent most evenings alone, waiting for Jason to come home, only for him to arrive exhausted, barely acknowledging her before collapsing into bed. There were other signs too, subtle but impossible to ignore. Jason had started taking more care in his appearance, something he never used to do. He showered more often before leaving for the shop, wore cleaner clothes, and even started using the cologne Evelyn had given him for their last anniversary. Bottle that had sat untouched on his dresser for months. She had tried to brush off these thoughts, telling herself she was overthinking things, but deep down, a sense of unease began to take root. As Evelyn dried her hands on a dish towel, the front door creaked open. Jason walked in, looking worn and tired. His dark hair was mussed from the long day, and the grease-stained shirt he wore looked like it had been through another grueling shift at the garage. He barely looked at her as he kicked off his boots, his eyes heavy with fatigue. "Long day?" Evelyn asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Yeah," Jason muttered, not bothering to elaborate. "Lots of paperwork. Some cars came in late. I had to stay and deal with it." Evelyn nodded, biting her lip. This was the same answer he had been giving for weeks. "Dinner's in the fridge if you're hungry," she said, gesturing to the covered plate on the counter. But Jason just shook his head. "Not hungry. I'm gonna hit the shower." As he disappeared down the hallway, Evelyn felt that familiar ache in her chest. The silence between them was deafening, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. something she didn't know how to hold on to. A few weeks later, the catalyst for their crumbling marriage arrived. Carrie Thompson, Jason's cousin. Carrie had always been the wild one in the family. At 28, she was still single, hopping from job to job and city to city, never staying in one place for too long. Evelyn hadn't seen her in years, not since Carrie left town for Chicago after a particularly messy breakup with her high school boyfriend. She was charming in a reckless way, always the center of attention at family gatherings, the kind of person who could light up a room and cause trouble in equal measure. Carrie's return to town was unexpected. One afternoon, she showed up at the auto shop, looking for a place to stay. She had just broken up with another boyfriend, and her life in Chicago had fallen apart. Evelyn didn't know much about the details, but Jason didn't hesitate to offer her a place to stay until she got back on her feet. At first, Evelyn didn't mind. Carrie had always been friendly with her, and she figured it wouldn't be for long. But as days turned into weeks, Carrie seemed to make herself more and more comfortable in their home. She was always there, lounging on their couch, making casual remarks about how boring small-town life was, and yet showing no signs of leaving. What unsettled Evelyn the most, though, was how Jason seemed to light up around Carrie. He smiled more when she was around, laughing at her jokes, engaging in long conversations that Evelyn wasn't a part of. It was a stark contrast to the way he was with her, quiet, distant, and preoccupied. Carrie had a way of drawing Jason out, and while Evelyn tried to tell herself that it was just family bonding, nagging doubt gnawed at the back of her mind. One evening, after dinner, Carrie and Jason sat in the living room, talking animatedly about some show they both used to watch when they were kids. Evelyn sat across from them, trying to participate, but it was as if she wasn't even there. The two of them were in their own world, reminiscing about old times, laughing together in a way that Evelyn hadn't seen Jason laugh in months. She felt like an outsider in her own home. Later that night, as she lay in bed next to Jason, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the way Jason's eyes lit up when he looked at Carrie, how his voice softened when he spoke to her. It was irrational, she told herself. Carrie was family. Jason would never betray her like that. But the unease refused to go away. The following weeks only worsened her suspicions. Jason began spending even more time at the shop, claiming he had to catch up on work or that a car needed urgent repairs. But Evelyn started noticing that Carrie's car was often missing from the driveway at the same time. When she asked Jason about it, he brushed it off, saying Carrie was helping out at the shop, keeping him company since business had been slow. Evelyn felt like she was losing her mind. She started checking his phone when he wasn't around, looking for any signs of an affair. But there was nothing. No texts, no calls, at least none that seemed suspicious. But the way Jason acted around her, the way he avoided her gaze and kept his phone close to him at all times, only fueled her paranoia. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, Evelyn overheard Jason talking to Carrie in the next room. She couldn't make out all of their conversation, but one line stood out clearly. "We just have to be careful. She's getting suspicious." Evelyn froze. Her hands trembled as she gripped the counter, her heart racing. Who were they talking about? Who was getting suspicious? Her. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They were talking about her. Something was happening between Jason and Carrie, something they were trying to hide. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't confront Jason without proof, but the weight of her suspicions was crushing her. She started paying closer attention, watching for any slip-ups, any signs that might confirm her worst fears. And as she did, she began to notice more and more the way Jason would go out of his way to avoid being in the same room as her when Carrie was around, the hushed conversations between the two of them, the way Jason would stiffen whenever she mentioned Carrie's name. The truth was there, just beneath the surface, but Evelyn wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. But deep down, she knew something had changed. and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. As the days turned into weeks, Evelyn's suspicion festered into obsession. The cracks in her marriage widened, and the relationship between Jason and Carrie began to reveal itself in increasingly unsettling ways. The happy facade they had maintained seemed to crumble under the weight of hidden truths, and Evelyn felt trapped in a world of deceit and betrayal. Jason's late nights at the shop became more frequent, his excuses less convincing. He claimed that the garage was overwhelmed with work, but Evelyn's frustration grew as she noticed Carrie's car parked outside more often. Her paranoia spiraled, leading her to keep a detailed log of Jason's absences and Carrie's visits, though it provided her little comfort. One evening, while Jason was working late, Evelyn decided to take a more active role in uncovering the truth. She waited until Jason had left for the shop, then followed Carrie when she saw her getting into her car. Evelyn kept a safe distance, careful not to be seen, her heart pounding as she trailed behind. Carrie's car drove out of town, heading towards a remote area on the outskirts. Evelyn followed cautiously, her anxiety mounting as they passed the familiar landmarks of their town. Finally, Carrie's car pulled into a small, secluded area with a few rundown buildings. Evelyn parked a safe distance away and watched as Carrie got out and walked towards a dilapidated barn. The sight of Carrie entering the barn sent a jolt of panic through Evelyn. What was she doing there? The barn had been abandoned for years, a relic of a past era. Evelyn's mind raced with possibilities, her emotions swinging between fear and fury. She waited, shivering in the cold night air, until Carrie emerged an hour later, her face flushed and her clothes disheveled. As Carrie drove back towards town, Evelyn returned home, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of suspicion and betrayal. The next morning, Evelyn confronted Jason, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "Jason, where were you last night?" "Saw Carrie leaving the barn on the edge of town." "What's going on?" Jason's face turned pale, and he stammered. I don't know what you're talking about. Carrie was helping me with some paperwork at the shop. She must have gone to the barn for some personal reason." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. I saw her leaving, and I know you were supposed to be with her." Jason's irritation flared. "You're being paranoid, Evelyn. I'm working hard to keep this business running, and you're accusing me of cheating with my cousin. It's not like that." The argument that ensued was a painful display of their fractured relationship. Evelyn's accusations were met with defensive anger from Jason, who denied any wrongdoing. Despite the assurances, Evelyn could see the cracks in his story, the way his eyes shifted uncomfortably when the conversation turned to Carrie. In the following days, Evelyn's suspicions intensified. She began scrutinizing every detail, watching Jason's interactions with Carrie with a keen eye. The conversations they shared were casual, but the undercurrent of intimacy between them was undeniable. Their private smiles, the way they leaned in close to whisper, every gesture was a knife twisting in Evelyn's heart. One evening, Evelyn decided to put her plan into action. She knew Carrie would be visiting the shop that night, so she devised a plan to catch them in the act. She waited until Jason left for the garage, then sneaked into the shop, hiding behind a stack of old tires in the dimly lit workspace. Her heart raced as she waited, the ticking clock echoing in the silence. Carrie arrived shortly after, her presence filling the space with an unsettling energy. Evelyn could hear their voices from her hiding spot, low and conspiratorial. Carrie's laughter, once vibrant and carefree, now had a sharp edge that Evelyn found unsettling. The conversation drifted to topics Evelyn couldn't fully make out, but the undertone of flirtation was unmistakable. As the night wore on, Evelyn's patience wore thin. She needed concrete evidence, something that would reveal the true nature of their relationship. She shifted slightly, trying to get a better view, when the sound of footsteps made her freeze. Jason walked into the shop, and for a brief moment, he was alone with Carrie. Evelyn's heart pounded as she peered through the gap between the tires, straining to hear their conversation. The intensity of the moment was palpable. Jason and Carrie stood close together, their voices low and urgent. Evelyn watched as they exchanged a lingering look, their faces inches apart. It was clear they were hiding something, but what exactly? Just as Evelyn was about to move closer, she heard a car pull up outside. The sound of the engine was followed by a loud knock on the shop door. Evelyn panicked, ducking down as Jason and Carrie quickly separated, their expressions shifting from intimacy to alarm. Evelyn's heart raced as she listened to the footsteps approaching. The door creaked open, and a new voice entered the shop. It was Tim, one of Jason's old friends, who had come by to discuss a business deal. Evelyn held her breath, hoping to overhear something revealing. But as Tim chatted with Jason and Carrie, the conversation turned to mundane topics, auto parts, repair schedules, and local gossip. Unable to hear anything incriminating, Evelyn quietly slipped out of the shop, her frustration boiling over. The brief glimpse she had seen of their interaction was enough to confirm her fears, but she needed more. Her emotions swirled with jealousy and anger, and she found herself increasingly consumed by the need to uncover the full extent of their betrayal. As Evelyn's paranoia deepened, so did the risk of their secrets being exposed. One afternoon, while Jason was out running errands, Carrie dropped by the house unexpectedly. Evelyn had been cleaning the living room when she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find Carrie standing on the porch, her face bright with a smile that Evelyn now found insincere. "Hey, Evelyn," Carrie said cheerfully. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. Is Jason around?" "No, he's out," Evelyn replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. "What brings you here?" Carrie's eyes flickered with a hint of nervousness. "Just thought I'd catch up with him. I've been meaning to talk to him about a few things." Evelyn forced a smile, though her mind raced with suspicion. "Well, come in. We can have a chat until he gets back." Carrie hesitated but stepped inside. Evelyn led her to the living room, where they sat down, the atmosphere tense. The conversation started off innocuously, with Carrie making small talk about her job search and the local news. But Evelyn could sense an underlying tension, an edge to Carrie's words that suggested she was hiding something. As they talked, Evelyn couldn't help but notice the way Carrie's gaze darted around the room, as if she was searching for something. When Evelyn mentioned that she was thinking of redecorating, Carrie's reaction was oddly subdued. She glanced at the family photos on the mantel and shifted uncomfortably, as if the presence of Jason's image was a reminder of the deceit that lay between them. Evelyn's anxiety mounted, and she struggled to keep her composure. She wanted to confront Carrie directly, but the timing wasn't right. Instead, she waited until Carrie left, promising to catch up with Jason soon. As the door closed behind her, Evelyn felt a surge of frustration and helplessness. She knew that the web of deceit was growing tighter, and the more she tried to untangle it, the more entangled she became. The final straw came when Evelyn discovered a series of text messages on Jason's phone that confirmed her worst fears. She had been cleaning the bedroom when she noticed Jason's phone lying on the bedside table. He had left it unlocked, a small but revealing mistake. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then picked it up, her hands trembling as she scrolled through his messages. The texts were filled with affectionate notes and coded language that left no doubt about the nature of Jason and Carrie's relationship. They talked about their secret meetings, shared intimate plans, and expressed their longing for each other. Evelyn's heart sank as she read each message, the reality of the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. Her mind raced as she tried to process the information. The evidence was irrefutable, and the pain of discovering it was overwhelming. She felt a deep sense of betrayal, not just from Jason but from Carrie, someone who had been so close to her. The anger and hurt were consuming, and Evelyn knew she had reached a breaking point. That evening, as Jason returned home, Evelyn confronted him with the messages. Her voice was steady but laced with raw emotion. Jason, I saw the texts. I know everything. You and Carrie have been seeing each other behind my back. Jason's face went pale, his guilt evident. Evelyn, I can explain. It's not what you think. But the explanations were hollow. The truth was out, and the damage was done. Evelyn felt a cold fury rising within her, a mix of heartbreak and anger that she could barely control. The confrontation that followed was charged with accusations, tears, and shattered dreams. The secret affair had been exposed, but the fallout was just beginning. Evelyn's world was unraveling, and as the tension between her and Jason reached a boiling point, she knew that things were about to spiral further out of control. The web of lies and betrayal had ensnared them all, and the consequences of their actions were yet to fully reveal themselves. In the aftermath, Evelyn was left to grapple with the painful reality of her crumbling marriage. The path forward was uncertain, and the darkness of the situation loomed large. As she navigated the treacherous waters of deceit and heartbreak, one thing became clear: the collision course of their secrets was leading to an explosive conclusion. The days that followed Evelyn's confrontation with Jason were a whirlwind of raw emotion and escalating tension. The facade of their marriage had shattered, and the unspoken animosity between Jason and Evelyn was palpable. Carrie, now fully aware of Evelyn's discovery, had become increasingly defensive, her interactions with Jason growing more furtive and strained. One rainy Friday evening, the atmosphere in the Carter household was thick with resentment. Evelyn had spent the day at home, her mind a turbulent storm of anger and confusion. She had no idea how to confront Jason or Carrie further. The betrayal felt overwhelming, and she was caught between confronting them again and the urge to escape the suffocating weight of her reality. Jason came home later than usual, drenched from the rain and carrying a tense aura. He entered the house with a stormy look, clearly agitated from a rough day. Evelyn was waiting for him in the living room, her face pale and eyes red from sleepless nights and constant crying. She had decided that the night would be the final confrontation, the breaking point of their unraveling lives. "Jason, we need to talk," Evelyn said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Now." Jason looked at her, his face hardened with resignation. "I know, Evelyn. I'm not in the mood for another fight." Their argument began in the living room, but the tension was too high, and soon they moved to the kitchen, the place where so many of their daily battles had played out. Evelyn's anger was raw and unfiltered, and Jason's defensiveness only fueled the flames. The conversation quickly escalated from a heated exchange to a shouting match, with both parties hurling accusations and grievances at each other. Meanwhile, Carrie was sitting in her car outside the house, waiting for Jason to come out. The rain pattered against the windshield, and her face reflected a mix of anxiety and frustration. She had been summoned to join them for what was supposed to be a final discussion, but her gut feeling told her it would be more volatile than she had hoped. As Evelyn and Jason's argument reached a fever pitch, the doorbell rang. The noise was so sudden and loud that it startled both of them. Jason, clearly exasperated, stormed to the door and flung it open, finding Carrie standing there, drenched and looking anxious. "What's she doing here?" Evelyn demanded, her voice quivering with rage. "I didn't invite her." "I swear," Jason said, glancing between the two women. "Carrie, what are you doing here?" Carrie hesitated, then stepped inside, dripping wet and visibly shaken. I thought I should come. I'm sorry, but this can't go on like this." The moment Carrie crossed the threshold, the tension in the room escalated. The three of them stood in the kitchen, their emotions boiling over. Evelyn was at her breaking point, her anger now mingled with a deep sense of betrayal. Jason's frustration was palpable, and Carrie's presence seemed to only exacerbate the already explosive situation. "What do you think you're going to do, Carrie?" Evelyn spat, her voice thick with venom. "Show up here like you're going to fix everything." Carrie tried to remain calm, but could hardly hide her agitation. Evelyn, please, let's just talk this out. We can sort this out without it getting ugly. Evelyn, in her fury, grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, her movements sudden and frantic. The blade gleamed under the harsh kitchen light, a symbol of her unrestrained anger. I don't know how to fix this, she shouted. You've both betrayed me in ways I can't even begin to comprehend. Jason, horrified by Evelyn's actions, tried to intervene. Evelyn, put the knife down. This isn't helping anything. The argument devolved into chaos, with Carrie trying to pull the knife from Evelyn's grip, and Jason attempting to calm her down. The kitchen became a whirlwind of shouting, pushing, and shoving. In the midst of the chaos, Evelyn's hand slipped, and the knife went flying across the room. Everything happened in a blur. The knife landed on the floor, but the force of the struggle had caused Jason to lose his balance. He stumbled backward, crashing into the counter. In the commotion, Carrie had been pushed too hard and fell against the edge of the counter. Her head struck the sharp corner with a sickening thud. She crumpled to the floor, unconscious and bleeding. The room fell silent, the reality of the accident sinking in. Evelyn stood frozen, her breathing ragged, as she stared at Carrie's motionless body. Jason rushed to Carrie's side, his face a mix of panic and horror. Carrie. Oh God, Carrie. Jason's voice cracked with desperation as he checked her pulse. Evelyn could see the blood pooling around her head, and the sight of it filled her with a profound sense of dread. Carrie's breathing was shallow, and Jason's frantic attempts to rouse her were futile. Evelyn's heart pounded as she realized the gravity of what had happened. The argument had spiraled out of control, and now, someone was gravely injured because of it. Jason's next actions were hasty and driven by panic. He grabbed his phone and called 911, his hands shaking uncontrollably. There's been an accident. Please, send help. While Jason dealt with the emergency call, Evelyn tried to collect her thoughts, but the reality of the situation was overwhelming. The guilt of having indirectly caused the injury, combined with the fear of the consequences, was crushing her. Her mind raced with what-ifs and the dire implications of their actions. When the ambulance arrived, Carrie was quickly loaded onto a stretcher, her condition critical. The paramedics worked diligently, but the somber atmosphere indicated that things were dire. Evelyn and Jason followed the ambulance to the hospital, their emotions a turbulent mixture of guilt, fear, and helplessness. At the hospital, they waited in tense silence, the weight of the situation hanging heavily over them. Hours seemed to stretch on endlessly as they waited for any news about Carrie's condition. The reality of their actions was starting to hit them with full force. The arguments, the betrayal, and the violence had culminated in this moment of tragic consequence. Eventually, a doctor approached them with a grave expression. I'm sorry, but Carrie Thompson didn't make it. She suffered severe head trauma, and despite our best efforts, we couldn't save her. The news was a crushing blow. Evelyn and Jason were left reeling from the shock, their worst fears realized. The death of Carrie had not only ended a life, but also marked the beginning of a legal and emotional nightmare for them both. The aftermath of Carrie's death unfolded quickly. The police investigation into the incident was thorough, with detectives questioning both Evelyn and Jason, trying to piece together what had happened. The story they told was one of escalating conflict and an unfortunate accident, but the severity of Carrie's injuries raised questions about the nature of the struggle. Evelyn was filled with a profound sense of guilt and remorse. She had never intended to hurt anyone, let alone cause a death. Her actions, fueled by anger and frustration, had led to an irreversible tragedy. The trial that followed was a painful process, with Evelyn and Jason facing charges related to involuntary manslaughter. Their testimonies were scrutinized, and the emotional strain of reliving the events took its toll. In court, the prosecution presented the case as one of reckless behavior, arguing that the argument and physical altercation were not justifiable and that Evelyn's actions had led to Carrie's death. The defense, however, portrayed the incident as a tragic accident, emphasizing the volatile emotions and the unexpected nature of the altercation. The trial was a harrowing experience for both Evelyn and Jason. They faced the media, the public's judgment, and the weight of their own guilt. Their once close relationship was now strained, with the trauma of the incident pushing them further apart. In the end, Evelyn was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The court recognized the emotional turmoil and the circumstances leading to the incident, but concluded that her actions were recklessly dangerous. She was sentenced to a prison term, a punishment that was a harsh reminder of the consequences of their actions. Jason, although not directly responsible for Carrie's death, was also affected by the trial, his life forever altered by the events. As Evelyn served her sentence, she found herself reflecting on the choices that had led to this point. The betrayal, the violence, and the loss of Carrie had left a permanent mark on her life. The emotional scars and the guilt of causing a death were burdens she would carry for the rest of her life. The tragedy of Carrie's death had served as a brutal lesson in the destructive power of unchecked emotions and the consequences of letting resentment and betrayal fester. For Evelyn and Jason, the fallout was a painful journey of seeking redemption and coming to terms with the irreversible damage caused by their actions.